I've made what I think might be my last breakthrough in all of the technology stuff that was holding me back with going kind of fully automated, and that was my complete dislike of and reluctance to work with resistive wheel sets. I mentioned quite recently that I've been making good progress with this science experiment of a train set, and the automation side of things is going really well. The last step I've got to get past in order to have the whole layout fully automated is making these long loco driven trains keep blocks occupied once the current drawing locomotive at the front has passed, and all we've got is lots of passive wagons or trucks dragging themselves along at the back. And the method I'd used so far to try and achieve that was the resistive wheel sets approach, the whole putting a tiny resistor on the wagon wheels, getting some electric paint and kind of connecting the whole thing up to draw a bit of current and keep blocks occupied when just otherwise passive wagons are passing through. But I had a number of problems with resistive wheel sets on a practical level, on getting the things actually fitted, and on a kind of sustainability level on actually keeping them working. On a practical level, and I think these wagons demonstrated that perfectly, was for some reason I was going with the approach of removing the wheels from the wagon or the coach before I then went and fitted the resistor, and then trying to put them back in the wagon once it was all fitted. The problem I had with that was the wagons, and a lot of coaches as well, were so stiff, it's really difficult to get a set of wheels to be fitted properly and into the grooves that they need to be in without actually moving. This is a plastic set, but it doesn't matter, without actually moving the wheels while I'm doing it. And as soon as the wheels move on the axle, the paint gets messed around and the resistor can fall off. So certainly if I was going to do any more of those things, I would be doing it while the wheels were in situ and correctly spaced in the wagon or coach. But that wasn't the only issue. Another issue I found, which is probably quite a lot more serious for me, is that some of these coaches, the ones in the foreground there for example, I fitted resistive wheel sets to about 18 months ago because I was messing about with automation and just learning about it with the lower deck. When I've come back to it all after 18 months and I want to do it again, what I've found is all of the resistive wheel sets on these coaches, for example, don't work anymore. Not a single one of them actually draws any current or shows a block as occupied anymore. So I can only assume that the paint is degrading over time and becoming less conductive, which is of course a problem, because that means all these coaches, all these wagons, every year or 18 months I'm going to have to wash all the old stuff off and put new stuff on again, and I really don't like the idea of that. And I did come up with a plan, and I was really kind of very close to going ahead and throwing myself into it, of putting kind of spot sensors on each block boundary. So we've got a block finish in here, there's a train on it there, and of course the locomotive's in it at the moment drawing current, so this block would be occupied. But it's got a load of plastic wheel coaches or non-current drawing coaches on the back of it, and there are no light units on the dummy on this one. It's the railroad version, so nothing behind it is drawing current. So as soon as that locomotive passes across this boundary into this block and is drawing current entirely from this block, that block goes unoccupied, even though there are a load of coaches and stuff in it, and that's going to lead to collisions, derailments and that kind of thing. So the idea I had was similarly to the occupancy sensors, the LDRs that I'm using now, the kind of spot sensors. I started thinking, well, could I put some kind of spot sensor on every block boundary on the layout. So there would be one, well, see, there's a set of points at the end of this, so there'd have to be one there, and then one there, one there, one there, one there, one there, one there, and that's just here, with a couple there. So although that would work and it'd be really effective, I think it would actually be a solution maybe for a smaller layout than this one. And of course, retrospectively adding sensors to the lower deck would be a big problem, because there's now upper deck above it and there isn't room to drill holes for sensors and that kind of thing. So it would have been very difficult to automate the whole layout using those LDRs, just because of the access, limited access to some areas of the layout. And so I was all set to go with that daunting prospect of maybe 60 odd LDRs dotted around the layout, pulling bits of it up, and all of the new devices and cabling and configuration that would go with that. And I happened to wake up really early yesterday morning. I was kind of, my mind got onto it, and that all the work that it would entail, and I suddenly thought to myself, I've written quite a lot of automation software anyway, and I've written software that drives trains around the layout, and part of what that software needs to do while it's driving these trains around the layout is track to a relatively accurate point where those trains are on the layout, not just which block the trains are in, but how far into each block the trains are, to do with stopping and slowing down and that kind of thing. And it suddenly dawned on me that if this software was already capable of tracking how far into a block a train was when it was moving, would it also be capable of tracking how far out of the last block the train would be? And what I started to think was, the software already knows when a new block, this is a block boundary here, already knows when a new block goes active. But because JMRI has required me to have all blocks contiguous, all blocks are connected to each other directly, this is the end of the last block. So when this block goes active on a train that the software is tracking, and it knows what direction it's going in, and it knows what speed it's going at, when this block goes active, it doesn't just mean that this block has gone active, it also means that the train has started to leave the previous block. So if the software knows how long the train is and how fast it's going, and when it entered the next block, which is also when it started to exit the last one, could it calculate when the whole train would have left the previous block? And then I started to think of the practicalities involved with that. And if I could get the software to do that, if I could get the software to recognise that a block should not go inactive, even though the sensor is saying that it should, how do I get that information into JMRI? And I thought, well, the best thing to do would be come right down to the root of it all, which is the device that's connected to the sensor. There's a couple of occupancy sensors over there, and this is a Galileo, but it's the same as an Arduino and an ESP, that kind of thing. So I thought, what about if, when the software realizes that a train has started to exit a block, if it then sends a message down to this device, or whichever one has got the relevant sensor on it, and says, hold that sensor, I know it's active at the minute because the train has just started to exit the block, the loco has just started to exit the block. We're talking in like milliseconds here, so that block's still active because the whole loco hasn't exited the block. So it sends a message down to this device. It says, hold that sensor, just ignore it, don't check it, don't do anything with it, just hold that sensor until you hear otherwise from me. And then the software continues to wait until it thinks the entire train has left the block, at which point it sends another message down to this device and says, okay, you can resume now, go and check the sensor, you can do what you usually do with it. And at that point, of course, the device goes and checks the sensor, finds that it's inactive, and sends the inactive message to JMRI. But all through that period, JMRI has completely been oblivious to the fact that actually that sensor went inactive 20 seconds ago, because the device had been told not to check it. Just ignore it, just leave it active, and then the device only resumed checking and updated JMRI when the software had calculated that the train had fully exited the block that it was starting to exit when this whole process was triggered. This is a good little stretch of track actually to demonstrate the current state and the problem. The line that's got the two double slips on it and the short length of track between. Now the double slips have got LDRs on, so they will go active when a train is passing over and when the light is dimmed. So they're not interested in current at all, so they will show active for all the time a train is passing over, whereas the block before it, the one there, is purely a current detector. The one in the middle is purely a current detector, and the one the other side of the double slip is purely a current detector. And as we watch this 47 come around, what's going to happen is as soon as the loco leaves that first block and hits the double slip, that block's going to go unoccupied even though all those coaches are in it. And the same's going to happen with this middle block here. Once the loco's past the double slip, all these coaches are still there, and you can tell they're still there because the double slips are occupied, but the middle block and the other block at the other end that are current detected should be staying occupied too. And I've now got the software running, which is hopefully going to put the holds on those sensors and estimate the length of the train. So this time as the train comes round, what we should see is the blocks that were going inactive before now stay active because the software is estimating that the train hasn't left yet. So if we watch the back of the train has now left the double slip on the first block. It's hit the double slip on left the second block, and the panel is correctly now showing occupancy, even though there's no current being drawn in those blocks. Although, as I covered in previous videos, the only trains I'm intending to fully automate are the pacer units and have them kind of swap over. The intention is that will happen while I'm also running trains manually on the layout, and that those trains will interact with each other. And that was the need for resistive wheel sets on all the trains, really, because the shuttles, the pacer units, could be waiting for a block to become occupied so that they can use it, and I needed to make sure that while all the trailing coaches on those trains were in the block, then that block would stay occupied. And I'm not using resistive wheel sets now, but that rule still applies. Therefore, I do need to have the length of all trains, regardless of whether they're going to be running automated or not, stored somewhere where both the shuttler app and the monitoring app can access them. And all this data I'm having to store, configuration data about each train with regard to automation, I'm trying to store somewhere central rather than keep it in the apps themselves, because multiple apps need the same data. Like the app that runs the automated trains needs to know length of the train, so it knows how far a train is into a block, and the monitoring app also needs to, because it needs to sort of simulate the resistor wheel sets and reserve blocks while it thinks they're still in it. So I looked around for somewhere to store, and what I found were these attributes that are stored as part of the roster file. Now, it does say here, do not change unless you know what you're doing, and I don't know what I'm doing, but what I did realise is I can add attributes here. So I decided as long as I added attributes that were very unique to what I was doing, I wasn't necessarily going to interfere with anything that JMRI is putting in there itself. So because the app I wrote, I kind of called it Shuttler, I've prefixed every attribute with the word Shuttler. This is for the 101, but you can see here I've got the MMS is millimeters per second, so this sets all of its speeds, what speed in millimeters per second it should be going when it's at caution, when it's at crawl, when it's at full, and then I think there's kind of the step up and step down for the ramping, so they ramp up and down nicely, and then right down at the bottom I've got the length of the train. So all I need to do is not every train needs all of this information if I'm not planning to automate anything, and the Shuttler app does have default values for all of this anyway, so these are just overrides for if the default values aren't quite right. So for the Deltic, for example, which I'm going to drive myself, but I just want its block occupancy to be managed, all I need in here for that one's record is the actual train length, which is the bottom one. So there we go. There are far fewer attributes on this one because it's not at the minute going to be run automated, but I do now have its length in there, which the monitor app will use to make sure that when the end of the train is in a block, that block stays occupied. I'm going to try and explaining exactly how it's how this app is managing to be aware of when a train is still occupying a block, even if there's no current detection. Before I kind of get into that detail, I think I could do with just kind of a basic explanation of speed profiling, because that is essential for all this to work. And the reason why speed profiling is essential is all these trains, they're all different trains, they all have different motors in them, they all have different decoders in them, and they all run at different speeds. So speed step 20 on one loco might be a massive world difference between speed step 20 on another loco. What that means, of course, is just setting a train to speed step 20 gives you absolutely no indication of how fast that train is actually travelling and how much distance it would cover in a set amount of time. And that is where speed profiling comes in. So the process of speed profiling is fairly simple. Say this third line down here, it's an isolated block. There's a set of points there, and let's say it's about 1 metre long. So speed profiling, what you do is you put your train, your loco, right just before the start of the block, and you say to JMRI or whatever software you're using, right, do speed profiling for this loco. And what you tell it is this sensor, the current detector for this one is your start sensor, and the current detector for the next block is your end sensor. And you also tell it that that piece of track is 1 metre long. So it starts driving. Say it starts, it does it almost, you can set how many speed steps, which speed steps you want it to do. Let's say we set it at speed step 20. It sets off from here, and JMRI will log the time that this sensor goes active, which is the start point. And then the train travels down, and then once it gets to the end, it activates the sensor at the end, and JMRI logs that as the end sensor. And say that took 10 seconds. It now knows that at speed step 20, for that particular loco, it takes 10 seconds to cover 1 metre. And therefore, a metre is 1,000 millimetres. So it takes 10 seconds to cover 1,000 millimetres, which means it covers 100 millimetres every second. And then it does that for all kinds of other speed steps as well. So it then ends up with a table of different millimetres per second actual speeds for different speed steps, and that's saved in the config somewhere where kind of we can all access it. Back here at the block boundary then, because we've got the speed profile now, we kind of have everything we need, or the app has everything it needs. So say we've got this class 47 and it's about to exit this block and it's going to enter this block. First thing it does, as soon as this block goes occupied, the app gets the sensor for the previous block and sends the message out saying hold the sensor for this block. Because a long train like that, again, loco might come onto here and the whole thing might go inactive because there's no current being drawn. So it stops that initial reporting of an empty block, because it gets the sensor for the previous block and it sends a message saying hold that sensor, just ignore it. So train comes in, say it's at speed step 20, comes into this block. As soon as this block goes active, then the process of exiting the previous block starts, and the app creates what I call kind of a speed log table. So it logs the time, that this precise time to the millisecond that this block went active, which is also the time that this block started to exit. And it also logs what speed step the train was at, and it knows what speed step the train was at because whenever it starts logging, tracking a train, it connects to WeThrottle, which always delivers what the current speed step is and delivers changes as well. So the speed can change. I might be slowing the train down or whatever. And first of all, it creates a first speed log entry here at the start. It says it was travelling at 20, speed step 20 at very precise time to the millisecond. And then there may be other entries in the log table as the speed log changed. That gets more complicated. Let's try and go simple. Imagine the speed doesn't change. So it was at speed step 20 when it entered this block. So we know from the speed profile that speed step 20 is 100 millimeters per second. So if we check after 5 seconds, and we keep checking continually anyway, maybe like, I don't know, 5 times a second, something like that. After 5 seconds, because we know it was travelling at 100 millimeters per second, we know it's now travelled 500 millimeters. And at 10 seconds, we know it's covered 1,000 millimeters, which is a meter, and so on. So we keep checking and we keep doing those checks, and all the time we're doing this, we're holding the sensor, saying stay occupied, just ignore it, telling the Arduino, whatever it is, just ignore that sensor, leave it occupied. And then of course, as we're doing these continual checks, because we know the length of the train as well, and say that that train is it's around 2 meters. So I'm doing more maths in my head now. So after what was it, 10 seconds, it was at 1,000 millimeters per second. So it was at 1,000 millimeters. So after 20 seconds, it would have been at 2,000 millimeters. And as soon as the measurement of distance covered since the block exit process started exceeds the length of the train, then that triggers the release of the sensor, which can then go back to actually reporting accurate values. The sensor very shortly after that, or probably presently, will report an empty block, and then that's the block exited. And now with that speed profile deltic running and with its length logged in the roster, I've got the app running, which is tracking it. You see it's being tracked because it's having blocks allocated to it ahead of where it's going. But the perfect kind of conduit for these sensor hold messages was, of course, MQTT. And this is just showing the app running. And these are the messages that are being sent out. So a 1 is a hold and a 0 is a release. So maybe if I just scroll out a little bit, it'll kind of sync with blocks going active. But the simple idea, like I've explained, is these block hold messages are going out when the transition between blocks starts, and then the message to release the hold is being sent out once the app has calculated that the train has exited the block. And really, as far as resistor wheel sets are concerned, that's it for all the trains. I really don't need them anymore. I don't need to worry about whether they work, whether they're degraded, whether there's plastic wheels on trains, because the software does appear to be quite reliably looking after it. Of course, if the software isn't running, then it reverts back to normal, but that doesn't matter, because if the software isn't running, then I'm not running automation anyway, and I'm just doing things manually. And you don't need resistor wheel sets if you're running trains manually, because you can visually see if a train has exited a block. Some trains have natural resistance, like or current draw throughout the train, like that APT that just squeaked past, and that's fine too, because all the software is doing is kind of temporarily holding sensors. Once the sensors resume again, then they'll work normally, so it doesn't matter that there is current detection in there. It's not going to delay anything. Certainly a limitation is that this would only ever work with contiguous blocks, which is something that JMRI kind of insists on anyway. I remember I was quite put out when I first started working on block detection in JMRI that this was the case, because I don't think it's the case in other software. In other software there can be gaps between blocks of track that isn't detected. Of course that wouldn't work here, because we need to know the activation of the next block is also the activation of the exit from the previous one, and there can't be a gap between those times. So this would only work under those circumstances.